Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today being Friday, the 7th day of July 2017. I trust that everyone had a restful, enjoyable night, and I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. Of course, For the Record is a show produced by the staff and the management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor. My co-host in the studio with me, Dr. Steve McField, Ms. Teresa Pitcairn. You're welcome to join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. It is normally that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, you can then email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at CANDW.KY. Just a little bit of housekeeping this morning. First of all, I want to point out that we're going to hold off on the calls until after the news at 8 o'clock because we want to get a foundation established in terms of what we want to discuss this morning. We keep promising that we're going to discuss permanent residence, the whole issue. But before we do that, we need to establish a basis for that discussion. And the basis for that discussion, of course, is going to be the various immigration laws that have been enacted, either in the Cayman Islands or for the Cayman Islands as well. So we're going to be discussing or mentioning some legislation, for instance, like the Immigration Restriction British Subjects Law. We will also be talking about the Aliens Law of 1905, the Deportation, British Subjects Law, Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, 1941, the Work Permit Law, 1965. And we will be looking at some of the UK immigration acts through the ages, as well. One significant one that we would want to remember as far as the UK is concerned is their Immigration Act of 1972. That year sounds familiar. That's when we got our Constitution as well, 1972 Constitution. What was significant about that UK Act? Well, prior to that, all citizens of the UK and colonies and former colonies as well had special rights to enter and reside in the UK. The UK then took a protectionist position, and as a result of that, restricted entry even to those citizens of their former colonies as well as those of the colonies. So you no longer had the right of abode in the UK, but you were restricted in terms of the time that you could remain in the UK. And that would be about the same time that the Cayman Islands passports, that they would stamp in it as well that we did not have the right of abode in the UK. That came about 1972. So we'll be talking about all of those things as well. But before I get into the discussion, I want to say good morning to my co-hosts and welcome to the show, starting with Miss Teresa. Good morning, dear.
I'm not hearing too well on this particular. My apologies.
Yeah, we'll change that for you.
But in a minute. Anyway, I'll just so that we don't waste the time. But I'd like to thank the audience as usual, and also it's a pleasure to be here this morning with you, OC, with you, Dr. Macfield, and share another morning when we can hopefully have a discussion where members of the audience will come in and also share their thoughts with the issues that we raise. And I wanted, this morning I got up particularly early because I remembered two texts that I read, in fact quite a few, that were written by Rachel Manley, Norman Manley's daughter. This was his eldest daughter that he had by a French lady when he was doing his first degree at London School of Economics. And in the context of immigration and whether or not our immigration laws provide us with economic democracy, I thought I'd raise a quote that I remembered reading some time ago. And here Rachel Manley speaks of her dad. And she says, and I quote, "The fastidious Michael being in a particular location with her and others where they were visited by a malnourished dog, and Manley's absolute determination to retain his distance from the animal. When one of the friends who was familiar with the dog defended its presence with the words, 'But the dog is so loyal,' Michael Manley snapped back, 'He's not loyal, he's needy.' On another occasion, this time in relation to social responsibility and charity, he was equally forthright. 'That business of people telling me, see that little lame mongrel? He's so loyal. I know he's not loyal at all. He's being denied his living right to dignity. Don't pat him on the back. Don't patronize him. I'd rather he not bother with me at all because he's off about on his own business. Then he's not needy anymore. You don't simply feel sorry for people. Charity is as humiliating as want." Now, there are many of us that have different views about Manley's regime, and I'm sure there's certain bitterness about some of his policies. But what we can't deny is that his attempts were to try and build a country, build a society based on justice, opportunity, and empowerment, where people had the real opportunity to work and advance themselves based on merit. And indeed, he gave Jamaicans that sense for the first time of not living in someone's borrowed shoes. And I raise that, and I raise it consistently on this show each time I'm here, as to whether or not democracy is merely the right to cast a vote every 4 years, or in the context of political democracy being designed largely to conceal from people the fact that there can be no real democracy without economic democracy. And in that context, I'd like to put the whole discussion of immigration law, whether or not our immigration law historically and certainly today provides us with that economic ability to actually find our own way based on merit, with opportunities to work hard and put bread and food on the table for our kids and our family.
Morning, Dr. Macfield. How are you? Thank you very much for that introduction, Ms. Teresa. Thank you.
Good morning, OC, Mr. For the Record, Ron Teresa. It's good to be back on Friday. It's the last day of the week, a short week. It's a short week, last day of a short week, and we'll see what happened this morning. I think we put off the topic for today. It's good because people will have a chance to mull over it during the weekend, and to savor it during the weekend. But I think it's a topic that you need to talk about, because it's a topic that affects our whole future, our present and our future, and it's a very serious topic that all the people in Cayman understands, and they're interested in hearing what we have to say about it.
Okay. Ms. Teresa, you wanted to say something. I think I interrupted you earlier. Can you repeat that part about, was it Rachel Manley that
Yeah, it
you
was
mentioned?
Rachel Manley,
And
yeah.
she would have been the daughter of
The first daughter of Michael Manley.
Michael Manley.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he had her while.
Okay, because someone thought that you may have said Norman Manley
No,
earlier.
Michael. No,
Yes.
this is Michael's
Okay.
first daughter.
Yes.
She's actually quite an impressive writer and novelist and poet as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so we're going to go a little closer to home now. We're going to be at home. First thing that I want to introduce our listening and viewing audience to, and you would have heard it mentioned here before. Dr. Steve McField mentioned it, right? And that has to do with the then Commissioner
Andrew Gerard,
right, in 1955, his statement to members of a legislative assembly. It was more than a statement. It was a caution. It was a plea, actually. And I'm going to read that verbatim for you. It says, the growth on a large scale of the dependency as a tourist resort, and that dependency is talking about the Cayman Islands, or the Cayman Islands, as a tourist resort will make some Caymanians very rich indeed. And it will certainly make all Caymanians a good deal better off in the material sense than they are now. I doubt if it will make anyone any happier. Remember now, he's talking about large-scale development, growth in the Cayman Islands. He says, the way to watch one step, if I may put it so inelegantly, is to accept that controlled development is necessary, and to accept that there is a crying need for a return to appreciation of true human values, a recognition, in brief, that Vanity Fair is in fact Vanity Fair. If you are not to sell your birthright for a mess of pottage now, if you are not to sell your birthright as a mess of pottage, now is the time to do something about it. Right? So he's warning us, don't sell your birthright for a mess of pottage. Do something about it. To go to plan development to strengthen the legislation in regard to immigration and aliens. I will repeat that. To go for planned development, and we hear many callers to this show talk about, the development in the Cayman Islands, and it isn't planned at all. It is more haphazard than anything else. To strengthen the legislation in regard to immigration and aliens. We have seen countries take the approach to strengthen their immigration laws when they feel that they are threatened, when they feel that their way of life is threatened, that their culture is threatened. They have strengthened their immigration laws. When they see that people's livelihood is being threatened, they have strengthened their immigration laws. You heard me talk earlier about the UK and the position that they have taken in the past with that. We see it now, the whole debate about a hard or a soft Brexit. It has to do with migration, immigration policies, and what will the UK do about those European Union citizens who are presently residing in the UK but do not necessarily have any security of tenure. Please stay tuned. We're going to a commercial break. When we return, the conversation will continue. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're going to continue our discussion on immigration legislation, the UK as well as the Cayman Islands. What I read in that quote, despite the fact that it came from the Hansards, I didn't read it directly from the Hansards. I actually read it from a presentation that was done by the current president of University College of the Cayman Islands, Mr. Roy Bawden. This was delivered at the first annual UCCI conference in 2010. He was the plenary keynote speaker at that particular conference in 2010. Also for you history and trivia buffs as well, I'd like to point out that what he also mentioned in that presentation was how the Cayman Islands got the moniker the islands that time forgot. And he points out that a gentleman by the name of John Maloney, in an article published in the Saturday Evening Post on April the 8th, 1950, described the Cayman Islands as the islands that time, forgot as well. So I'm giving him credit for what was presented by him in his presentation. I also want to point out that his comments in relation to Commissioner Gerard's exhortation to the Legislative Assembly in 1955, he says that while there is no documentary evidence to explain that Gerard had any conception of globalization, because we didn't have that terminology at that time, he says that his observations were eerily prescient, right? He also points out that there is no convincing evidence to suggest that Caymanian legislators paid even a modicum of interest in Gerard's warning, and we know that now. We know that they really didn't pay much interest in that until 1972, actually. Or 1971, when we ended up with the Caymanian Protection Law, 1971. Says no commitment was given to planned development, and in spite of the leasehold precedent between Benson Greenall and the Cayman Islands government, when land sales gained prominence, political directorate took no step to protect Caymanian owners by encouraging them to sell leasehold. Simultaneously with these developments were the growing number of Caymanian seamen employed in shipping companies based in the United States, where they served as a catalyst for a growing sophistication of Caymanian society. Remittances from the large number of Caymanian seamen were, by the time, being supplemented by revenue from the growing tourism trade. In 1953, Barclays Bank established a branch in Grand Cayman, and 10 years later, Royal Bank of Canada, the first of the major Canadian banks, opened its doors in Grand Cayman. These establishments superseded the Government Savings Bank, which had been founded in 1907 to service the public sector requirements. So he goes on and he talks, about that. Then he talks about the fact that the establishment of /Caymanian /expatriate and others disquiet about the growing number of newcomers, quote unquote immigrants, brought the necessity for the modernization of Cayman Islands immigration laws, and more importantly, to redefine who was Caymanian. He goes on to mention some of those legislation that we say that we're going to talk about this morning. He mentions the fact that the Immigration Restriction British Subject Law 1961 used a simple definition of persons born outside the islands or who were not domiciled in the islands. This legislation stipulated that if you lived in the islands for 5 years, you belonged to the islands, but if you left for 5 years, you did not belong. Such a simplistic definition sufficed until the 1970s and the advent of Lyndon Pindlin's Bahamas. Then, so I'm going to stop there for a minute. and get Dr. Steve McField and Ms. Teresa to comment on Mr. Roy Borden's presentation and his comments there. Dr. Steve?
Roy was also a admirer of Gerard, so am I. But remember now, the reason why Gerard's words were not heeded by a majority of the people in the islands was because many of the people who were in control of the island did not like Gerard, Andrew Gerard. Because remember now that when Andrew Gerard came here, there was a lot of corruption and lawlessness in the government. And Andrew Gerard tried to bring some sort of semblance of cohesiveness in the country. And also, one of the things that Gerard was not favored for was the fact that Gerard was the one who actually broke the back of the social segregation that existed in the Cayman Islands at the time. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, and a lot of people don't like to say. But when Gerard came here in the 1950s, there were segregated social events, like dances and parties and things like that. And a lot of people don't remember the famous dance in the town hall, where a lot of civil servants got fired. Where Gerard took in two colored people in the white people's dance, and that was the pulling asunder of the segregation policy that had existed for generations and generations in Cayman Islands. And you may want to talk about that when you come back later on. Okay. But Gerard did that, and for that, Gerard made a lot of enemies of the establishment, and so they didn't want to hear what Gerard had to say. In fact, one prominent politician told me personally about the night before Gerard was leaving, on the eve of Gerard's evening, how he met Gerard at town hall with Mr. Roddy Watler, and what Gerard said to him, because Gerard and him had a feud ever since Gerard arrived on the island. And Gerard tried to make amends to it and to make things good before he left.
Okay. When we return, we're going to continue with that, and I'm also going to ask Ms. Teresa, after we return and you finish, Dr. Steve McField, to read some more about the established Caymanian / expatriate and others from Mr. Roy Borden's presentation. Please stay tuned. We're going to the news. For the record, we'll be back immediately after. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. Before I hand over to my co-hosts, I want to thank everyone who give favorable comments about this show. For the Record, they talk about the balance that we have on the show. Miss Teresa, who brings that calm, cool, and collected atmosphere, and that's the foil against Dr. Steve McField and me in terms of our more aggressive approach to things. I want to thank all of you who give us comments on that. I want to say a special shout out this morning to the Douglas sisters. When I say Douglas, that's their maiden name. Vadley and all of their sisters. I saw some of them at the Mary Lou and them. I saw them at the Harbor House Marina the other day talking about the show and everything else, as well. So I want to give a special shout out because I know that there are many people who either listen to us live in the mornings or watch on government TV in the evenings as well. So special shout out to all of you, and thank you very much for the tremendous amount of support that you give to Radio Cayman and also to For the Record. So before we go to Ms. Teresa, Dr. Steve, I want you to finish that story about Gerard and the Commissioner Gerard and the dances at the town hall.
Yeah, well, as I was said, Gerard was not very welcome here, and he was not very liked by the establishment. Because one of the first things that Gerard found when he came here, there was no money in the treasury. That most of the merchants who on that day were not paying their custom duties to the government, and then there was lack of funds, and Gerard had to borrow money from people like Albert Smith to pay the civil servants and to pay the people the workers on the road. But the most important thing that Gerard did was Gerard broke the back the social segregation in the Cayman Islands, and that happened one night in the dance in the town hall. The town hall was then the venue for dances. There were no nightclubs and all those things then in 1950, and we would have what we called state dances. State dances was dances where when the governor came over from Jamaica to visit, or when the warships come in, they would have a state dance. And at this particular time in our history, the de facto leader of the government was Mr. Willa Farrington from West Bay. So at this dance, he went to Gerard and said he came for the money to have the dance, to put on the dance tonight for us, and money put on the dance for them. And Gerard said, well, who's us? And he says, oh, the white people. And them is the colored people. He says, we usually have the dance for us like tonight, and the dance for the colored people tomorrow night. Now, they would have the dance for the white people in the town hall, and would have the dance for the colored people in the old courthouse.
Okay.
Now, but one of the reasons why it was like that too, they couldn't have the dance the same night, was because they only had one band, James Thomas and the Happy Boys. You see? So they couldn't have two dances the same night. But they didn't want the colored people to dance in the town hall the following night. They would have to dance in different venues, so they would let them dance in the old courthouse. So this night, Gerard gave them the money, and Gerard waited for them and planned. So Gerard asked around for who was the best dancer and best dressed people in Cayman. Now that time, your uncle,
Uncle Malachi.
Malachi Connor, used to call him Sky Blue.
Sky Blue.
Had won the best dressed man contest that year in Cayman, because they used to have that in those days, and quadrille dances and the best dressed contest with his cream serge suit and so forth. And Miss Annie Connor had won the best quadrille dancer from Georgetown, and Gerard contacted them, and Gerard told them to come up with the town hall, get dressed and come out to the town hall, and that he told them what he was going to do. And when the dance got hot and heavy that night around 10 o'clock, James Thomas is playing his clarinet, boy, and Shifley them is playing the guitar, and Burley is beating the drums, boy, and the dance gets hot and heavy. Gerard went outside, brought in Miss Annie Connor and Sky Blue. Gerard gave Sky Blue, made his wife dance with Sky Blue, and Gerard started dancing with Miss Annie Connor. And a lot of the white people start leaving the dance. And Gerard stopped the music. And Gerard says, all the people who are not civil servants can leave, but the civil servants will not be able to leave. And one of the top civil servants at that time was Mr. Arthur Borden, Truman Borden's father. And he left the dance. And Gerard fired him. Now, he was the highest paid man in Cayman at the time, because he was the wireless operator working for Cayman Wireless. He was had the printing, all the printing for the government. He was working for the Caribbean Met Service, and he was also working for the Cuban Met Service at the old wireless station that they built. And Gerard fired. He never worked with government ever since. That is how Gerard, from that day, Gerard said there will be no segregated dances, public dances with public money, segregated dances in Cayman Islands. It was from that day, that dance, that the seamen then start desegregating people, places like Beach Club and Tortuga Club in East End. What Gerard, so Mr. Ormond Panna was telling me the story now, because Gerard had arrested Mr. Ormond, and he had arrested Pat Alonso Borden.
Right, he would have been Henderson at the time.
Pat Henderson. Because Gerard had said they were driving their car fast all around the island, and Gerard didn't like that because that was disturbing the peace. And he had sent Sergeant Nixon for them, but Sergeant Nixon said they wouldn't come. And Gerard went out and arrested them himself. And Gerard brought them to the government house. And they thought Gerard was going to put them in jail, but he didn't put them in jail. Gerard got 3 bottles of Appleton, and he put the 3 bottles on the Appleton on the table. And he says the one who finishes first and still standing up will leave. And when they got up that next morning, slump, they were on the floor, and Gerard was standing. Mr. Ormond told me that. And Mr. Ormond told me that the night that the eve before Gerard was leaving, they had a dance for Gerard in the town hall. And Mr. Ormond said he was sitting out on the steps of the town hall, he and Mr. Rodder Watler. And Gerard came to shake Mr. Ormond's hand. And Mr. Ormond refused to shake his hand because during the time Gerard was here, Mr. Ormond was arrested so many times by Gerard. And Gerard was then the commissioner. He was the collector of customs. He was everything, and he was also the chief magistrate.
Yes.
And after one of the episodes of Mr. Ormond's arrest, Mr. Ormond, Gerard now live across the street from Gerard, right back here now where the old government house, where the new government houses was.
Yes.
No, Gerard, that would be Ormond Partner's house.
Yes.
And Gerard would be here where we are now. And Mr. Ormond had a flat cistern. A cistern built off the ground. And Mr. Ormond had his shotgun. Lying on his cistern on his belly, pointed to Gerard's door. For days, Gerard can come out his house. And all Carly would come and say, Ormond, you got to stop this foolishness. and Ormond say, I go shoot the cat. I go shoot him. And that went on and on and on until Gerard left. And Mr. Ormond said that night, he said, I refused to shake his hand. When he came, I wouldn't tell you the word Mr. Ormond told me, but he said, I refused to shake his hand. And Mr. Ormond was a stalwart. And those two men had that fight. But you know what? You know the most interesting thing that Gerard said? That is one of my favorite. Gerard said that the Caymanian politicians are the most unscrupulous bunch of politicians that he's ever met. He said they do not like each other. They will do anything to harm each other. He says that all of them wants to be the captain and go up to the wheelhouse to steer the ship. And he says if you don't let them all be captains and open the wheelhouse door for them to steer the ship, they will go down the engine and wreck the engine so the ship cannot sail. That's what Gerard said about Caymanian politicians in those days.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Macfield. Ms. Teresa, I know people are inquiring about phone calls. Once we take our commercial break, then we'll take some calls, but we want to continue with the history of the immigration legislation in the Cayman Islands. So let's have you read from Mr. Roy Borden's presentation again.
Yeah, I was going to say this,
Sure.
to Steve too, that the former governor, Mr. Thomas Russell, said the same thing as well. And I quote, he said something like, I made a note of this from something that I was reading some time ago about, essentially he paraphrased it. He said that the politicians stay in office too long and they hold grudges against each other. And the grudges that they hold against each other for such a long time makes it impossible for them to do what is right political, but by way of the people.
Okay.
So yeah. But so Roy was talking about the arrivals of the British citizens who were invited to leave the Bahamas during the 70s. And this meant that these people, in an effort to avoid a repetition of their Bahamian experience, sought some form of Caymanian belonger status. Amidst the flurry of legislative activity necessitated by the attempts to restrict the numbers of those belongers, we saw the emergence of the Immigration Restriction British Subjects Law, the Aliens Law, the Deportation British Subjects Law, and the Work Permit Law, 1965. And these were all considered to be in need for the modernized economy that was evolving.
Yes.
Yeah. And as a result, these legislation actually superseded what became the Caymanian Protection Law in 1971.
Okay. I want to point out a little bit more what the term expatriate and where he saw it coming from as well. We hear that in the lexicon of our discussions these days.
Yeah, his view at the time was that the expatriate and paper Caymanians entered what he called societal lexicon. It is difficult to identify precisely when the term expatriate became a popular description, although Hanners, this was one of those guys that wrote some of the early discussions about our history, in commenting on what he terms the beginning of discord, and that's very interesting. He suggests that the term expatriate could have been the first used in the 1970s. And there's a paper that was written in the Nor'Wester in December 1976 where John Redmond suggested the following. During the heady years of development a few years ago, many expatriates, in brackets newcomers, arrived on the islands to work, and those that stayed are now becoming eligible for Caymanian status in increasing numbers. And I think that's when you started to feel some of the tensions arising from the evolution of the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, he also makes some suggestions pointed out some suggestions about the Caymanian Protection Law 1971, and he says that it is suggested that the Caymanian Protection Law 1971, far from achieving the objective of ensuring that Caymanians succeeded in the workplace, became an instrument which was open to circumvention.
Yeah.
Indeed, this legislation seemed to have been misunderstood by established Caymanians who interpret it as meaning that their only qualification for getting jobs in the new economy was to be a Caymanian. Succeeding political directorates from 1976 to 2000 played to this gallery whenever elections were close by insinuating that expatriates had no permanent place in Caymanian society. And then, of course, when elections were over, however, the matter was rationalized under the pretext that such persons are needed to service the Caymanian economic miracle. To date, succeeding political directorates have failed to apply satisfactory closure to this situation. So that critique of the Caymanian protection law, the misinterpretation of it, and you wonder sometimes whether or not that had anything to do with the decision, that interpretation of it had anything to do with the decision to change the terminology from Caymanian protection law to the immigration law, as well. We're going to take a commercial break. If we have any callers online, we're going to take those callers as well. I'm told that we have 2 callers. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, my 2 co-hosts, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn and Dr. Steve Macfield. We're going straight to the phone lines. First caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
morning.
How are you?
3 good friends. I couldn't help from tuning in on this with segregation. My favorite uncle, Double O, which I guess I have my favorite uncle because he's my favorite nephew and he always had the hand out. He told me Doc Rose was president of the White People Association.
Yes.
He couldn't get in the dances, but his good friends, Clive Glidden and Leland, could get in. So he got a pot of some cabbage and made him carry it and marched up the town hall dance.
Johnson's baby powder, huh?
Brother Steve can always tell you a little bit about the cop hall dance since you come down there.
That's right.
So after a while, I was one of them. I said I could go any place, but for a while, I was the background too. So I didn't have to go to South Africa to see segregation. I saw it right in West Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the law always told me that Miss Joyce Hilton was president of the Young Wives Association. So he had some good stories, and I can leave you all now, and you all doing a good job with the other topics on out there.
Thank you.
Immigration topics. Okay. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ivan. Thank you. Next caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking my call.
Morning, Quince.
Good morning.
Quincy Brown here. I'm sure, Mrs. Pitcairn, today would be a rather interesting day to be in Hamburg, Germany, as Putin and Trump meet together. Russia's not as bad as some media houses in other countries make it out to be. I'm sure you would agree, having just come from Russia.
Yeah.
Beautiful country, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I was pleased when you were on the other morning and you were talking about your Russian experience. Hopefully, when I see you again, which we don't get to see each other that often, we live on separate islands, you can perhaps elaborate a bit more on your Russian experience. I'd be more than happy to listen to you now.
Okay.
All right, why I've called. A very interesting program, as always, very enlightening, informative. Mr. O.C., I think you're doing a great job. And continuing having these guests come on, such as Dr. Maxfield, Mr. Kern, Honorable Mary Lauren, I think it can only enhance your show moving forward. A lot of history is being put out there. It saddens my heart that Cayman 27 started in 1991 or 1992. A lot of their older tapes and videos have been dumped, so we're not holding things for posterity. I'd be very interested to hearing reruns of Doreen Miller's Open Line. What was the discussion back in 1978, 1979, 1983? What were Caymanians discussing at that time?
Yes.
How did we arrive where we are now? And finally, before I hang up, I'm wondering if Dr. Steve Maxfield, attorney at law, could get together biographies. I know if you go to the National Archive, we could get them, and I don't get there as often as I would like to, and the general public, I know, probably never. But we need to get bios of our 9 national heroes: Jim Barton, Sybil McLaughlin, Thomas Farrington, Joyce Hilton, Ormond Panton, Desmond Watler, Mary Wood, William Connolly, Roy McTaggart, our 9 national heroes, because teachers tell me they don't know the stories of the national heroes. So for goodness sake, if teachers don't know, how can they teach the students, right? The only one I seem to know is our living national hero, Mrs. Sybil McLaughlin. I interviewed her when I was with Vibe FM, and I did a personal interview with her when she invited me into her home back in 2012. But we don't know our national heroes, and we need to know what are their major contributions to Caymanian society to allow them to be given the distinguished title of national hero. We need to see their pictures. We need to know their stories. And I think this is a good medium to get the message out. I'll close by saying it's not helpful when we have prominent British lawyers in this country. I'm thinking of one in particular, whose name I will not call, who back in 2003, the quincentennial year, said, why is Cayman insisting on using the term national? Cayman is not a nation. We're a crown colony, so stop using the term national. Well, with that kind of attitude, we will never embrace and celebrate our Caymanianness. I'm Quincy Brown. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you very much, Quincy. Well said. One more caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. O.C.
Good morning, Miss Georgette.
Good morning, Mr. Risa, and good morning to Dr. Steve Maxfield. This
Good
is
morning,
Georgia
ma'am.
Bank.
Good morning.
I tell you, some memories have come flooding back in my mind this morning, and I won't do it. I would never call their names, but I remember as teenagers, a bunch of us girls would quite often, my girlfriends and I would go and stand away from the town hall and see, we could see a little bit what was going on inside. And I could name one of him. He's now deceased, and all of you know him and know his family. One of Cayman, that man, he was Cayman's greatest dancer up in that town hall. And also 1 or 2 women who were wonderful dancers. But of course, they're gone to their rest now.
Mm-hmm.
But this business of being prejudiced, the white against the black and the black against the white, that is something that I guess it was going on before I was born, and that's almost 90 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't want to talk
about it.
it. We always try to cover it up. But it did happen, and believe it or not, it's still happening.
Mm-hmm.
So may God bless you, Mr. Risa, and all your family. And I enjoyed your, the little talk you gave about your visit to Russia. And God bless you and your family, Mr. O.C. and Dr. Steve Maxfield.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we go to the next break now, Dr. Maxfield, before we start to talk about the Caymanian Protection Law 1971, which came into effect on the 27th of March 1972, I want you to talk about another occasion in the BRAC where something happened as well.
Yes, before 1971, Caymanians had already started to feel threatened by the influx of people coming in, especially those who were coming from the Bahamas after the Bahamas got their independence, and so the first semblance that Caymanians were going to be protected and that a law would subsequently be enacted was done by Miss Annie Borden. And that was in 1962. It was the first time that the Legislative Assembly sat in the Cayman Brac, in the sister island. And at that sitting, Miss Annie Borden moved a private member's motion. It says, private member's motion setting up a statutory board to deal with all applications for work permits was moved by Miss Annie Huldah Borden. So Miss Annie Huldah Borden was the first one who saw what was coming and knew the need for for regulations for people coming into the island to work, and that was the first forerunner. That was the forerunner of the 1971 law.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Ms. Teresa, I want to ask you to, if do you still have Mr. Roy Borden's document? If we go to page 12, I want you to point out what he said, talks about between 1971 and 1992, the number, about the growth in the number of work permits, talked about a little bit about the quota there. That again will lead us into our discussion as well. Found it?
I'm on the page.
Between 1971 and 1992, land labor expatriacy formula for contention. Okay, I'll read it. Between 1971 and 1992, the number of work permits had grown to such an extent that the authorities proposed quotas on work permits from persons in certain jurisdictions. This attempt to balance nationalities within Caymanian society may have brought temporary relief, but it offered no long-term satisfactory solution. Just patchwork. Putting a Band-Aid onto the wound. With the inability to comprehend the English. With the inability to comprehend the English language posing a major problem with replacement of Spanish-speaking work permit holders, employers were encouraged to recruit workers from the Philippines. For a brief time, it seemed like the gesture would work until it was realized that should current rates continue, Filipinos would be as numerous as Jamaicans whom they were intended to replace. So he talks about that. We're going to take a commercial break. When we return, we're going to go into the Caymanian Protection Law 1971. We're going to see its objects and reasons given by Mr. Benson Ebanks, the mover of that legislation. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Oric Connor. My co-hosts with me in the studio this morning, Dr. Steve Macfield and Ms. Teresa Pitcairn. No callers at this point in time. Okay, while Ms. Teresa is researching something else, we're going to ask Dr. Steve Macfield to make some comments about more comments about the 1972 legislation.
Yes, now, on the 27th of March, 1971, when the Caymanian Protection Law came into force, it had a very significant clause in it, significant provision in it.
Actually, 72 it came into effect.
It's 72. The 1971 law came in 1972
yes.
On the 27th of March, and it had a very significant, very important provision in it that said the following. These persons are deemed to be Caymanians. One, all persons who before the 27th of March who are domiciled in the Cayman Islands. Two, all persons who were ordinarily resident in the Cayman Islands for 5 years before the 27th of March. And it also said that all the people who were gainfully employed in the Cayman Islands before the 27th of March did not need to have a work permit. So it grandfathered all the people who had been gainfully employed in the Cayman Islands before the 27th of March, all the people who had been ordinarily resident for 5 years before the 27th of March, and all the people who were domiciled before the 27th of March. Now, out of that law came the famous Roper case, because Roper was a young man who had come from Jamaica with a guy called Mr. Erlin Miles, who through the Boy Scouts, and they had took Roper in. Now, Roper didn't have any parents. His parents, I think, were deceased, but Roper had lived with his grandmother, and Roper had came here and had a small business going, cleaning stores and cleaning shop windows and cleaning windows and stuff. But nobody came and wanted that job. But when they saw it, but when they saw it become a lucrative job, Roper started with a motorcycle and a pail and bucket, and then he moved with a bicycle. Then he moved to a motorcycle. Then he moved to his van, and then he started getting his products done. Roper's aerosol, Roper's toilet bowl cleaning, all these things. It became a money maker, and of course they took away Roper's work permit. They would not give it to him. They revoked his work permit, and Roper went to every lawyer around until Roper came to see me, and I had just left the government. When Roper came to see me in 1983, and I think, if I can remember, it was Section 23 in the Caymanian Protection Law that said if you had been gainfully employed on the 27th of March 1972, when the law came into effect, that you did not need to have a work permit. And we took the matter to court. And Sir John Summerfield found that Roper did not need to have a work permit because he was gainfully employed on that day when it came into effect. And we also sought a declaration from the courts that Roper was domiciled in the Cayman Islands on that day, so that Roper would be deemed to be a Caymanian. And Sir John Summerfield found that because Roper came here when he was a juvenile, and he was not actually adopted by the Miles family, that Roper could not have his own domicile. His domicile was his grandmother's domicile, and his domicile was in Jamaica, and he refused to give that declaration. So all of the cases that came, the MacDonald case, all of those cases came after the 1971 law came into force in 1972, and it had far-reaching consequences. And that is where the Constitution gets the definition of Caymanian from the Caymanian Protection Law, because it says all persons who are deemed, who were ready, who, in fact, that's how I got Cayman status, because I was living in Cayman Islands on that time, on the 27th of March 1972, when the law came into effect. So that's why I'm a Caymanian.
And I think that there was it Section 15(1)? It says if you were born in the Cayman Islands or of parents, one of whom
who was born outside
or domiciled in the Cayman Islands, that you possessed Caymanian status.
Yes.
And then, of course, we saw 1977 the amendments brought by Mr. Truman Bodden to change that, because it was held it wide open to many. Bear in mind that under that same 1972 legislation, if you were a British subject and basically a citizen of the UK and Collins British subject, which included all of the Commonwealth countries, if you were married to a Caymanian, on the date of that marriage, you automatically obtained Caymanian status. It wasn't like it is today, where you have to get residence and employment right certificate, and after 7 years, then you can apply on grounds of marriage. It was on that date, and we had incidents where I remember one famous case, and some of our listeners may remember this. There was a gentleman who used to work on the dock.
Yes, I remember that case.
And during his break on the dock, they took him, went and picked him up, took him to a marriage officer.
That's right.
And had him married off, and none of his family knew anything about it. and of course the wife, quote unquote wife, got Caymanian
deemed to
status
be Caymanian
immediately.
Immediately.
Right, immediately.
All you had to do was show the marriage certificate,
and that
you
was
were deemed to be Caymanian.
And that was it.
But the section that Truman closed up was this section that says, listen to very carefully.
Yes.
Any child, comma, or adopted child under the age of 18 years old.
Got a call?
Huh?
Go ahead and finish that. We have a caller, but go ahead and finish.
Were deemed to be Caymanians.
Yes.
So that means you have two classes of people. Any child, that means any age, anywhere born, or if you were adopted child under the age of 18, you were deemed to be Caymanian.
Okay, yep.
And Truman took the comma from behind any child. And it says now, any child who under the age of 18. So if you're over the age of 18, you were not deemed to be Caymanian.
Yeah. And they also made a distinction between those persons born in the Cayman Islands and born outside of the Cayman Islands. We have one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. Sorry for keeping you waiting so long.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Connor. It's Franklin Smith here with the panel.
Morning, Mr. Franklin.
The other day I called into your show and I complained about the mosquitoes. I want to, this morning, take the opportunity to publicly thank MRCU for having done a spray over the farms in East End there, so that the workers could get some relief from the mosquitoes. So I take the opportunity to thank MRCU for that, doing that, and I hope they would do it a little more often.
Yes. Mr. Franklin, I must say that after we mentioned it on here, that many people said, thanked me for it and said that they're not sure whether or not the comments that were made on here prompted them to get the ball rolling on it, but it certainly did.
Well, it had to be, OC. But I thank you for it, all the team. Thank you, sir.
Okay. And some people are talking about the size of the mosquitoes, that they've never seen them that big before. If these the experiments that they're taking place with these genetically modified mosquitoes that are being released, if that is the cause of it, or if it's not the cause, please tell people, say something.
Yes,
they were extremely active when the West Bears, not only West Bears, but all over the island, were up against what they were doing. They were out there telling the public what was being done, what wasn't possible, what was possible. Tell us now as well. Keep the public informed.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I know the size of mosquitoes in East End, and Mr. Connor, I also go to Little Cayman, and oh my God, I'd never seen mosquitoes like that thick before in Little Cayman all the years that I go up there. So I don't know what has happened, but I can tell you something is happening. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Franklin. Someone else had sent me one on the 30th of June. It says, OC, on a talk show, make them know that mosquitoes are at East End day and night, some as big as flies. This is no exaggeration. Says you can't work your land in the day because of the amount of mosquitoes are out all day. Not just at dusk and dawn, but they're out there all day. They bite areas, leaving huge blotches and itch for hours afterwards. Some people are saying that this is the most mosquitoes that they've seen since the 1940s. And now these are people on the ground telling you about it. They're the ones that are being bitten by it. So, like Mr. Franklin has pointed out, some relief to it, but continue, but let the people know what's going on as well. Ms. Teresa, over to you. We're going to go. Should we go to headline news now? Not yet. Okay. Looking at the mover of the bill, Caymanian Protection Bill, Mr. Benson Ebanks, in 1971.
Okay, I didn't find that.
Objects and reasons, of that. Okay. What I'll do is I'll read that part and then find you. We will have it come to you later on. It says, Objects and reasons for this bill, that's the Caymanian Protection Law 1971, by reason of the fact the advantages offered many people by taking up residence in the Cayman Islands and the unprecedented prosperity of the tourist industry, there has arisen a grave risk that the social character of the islands, as well as the way of life, the population, may be adversely affected by the influx of private and business sectors and other consequential factors. It is sought to enact legislation calculated to control this situation by affording means of protecting the traditional way of life of the islanders, by cushioning the impact of the establishment of international business interests and of settlement here by people who formerly had no interest in the public and private affairs of these islands. It is also sought to take advantage of the opportunities to consolidate and bring up to date the laws affecting immigration and deportation. So it is spelled out quite clearly there what the intentions of the law was. No question whatsoever to protect Caymanians as well. Headline news, when we come back, we're going to ask you to go over that some more, Ms. Teresa, and you and Dr. Steve Macfield to basically critique that as well. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. Dr. Steve Macfield, you want to say mention something about the some of the powers of the Executive Council at the time, as well.
Between 1976 and 1989, I think it was, I would say between 1976 and 1983, 82, 83, the Executive Council took upon itself the power to grant work permits to lawyers. That was something that the Executive Council reserved to itself. And the reason for that was the law school was opening. Caymanian lawyers were being trained. And the Executive Council then did not want any particular law firm to grow so large that there would be an imbalance in the country and it would usurp all the economic benefits to one law firm. And so for a long time, I think for about 3 or 4, maybe 4 years, from 3 to 4 years, to get a work permit for a lawyer, you had to send the application to the Executive Council, and the Executive Council would grant the work permit. And that ensued until I think that the Executive Council, the then Executive Council, between 1976 and 1984, left the political scene under the Unity team. But under the Unity team, lawyers had to apply to the department, to the Executive Council for a work permit, and because they were restricted. So you see, the protection law, its whole object and reason was to protect the Caymanians in every sphere of life, to protect them, to protect their interests and their future, which we don't have today.
Because they saw the writing was on the wall, more than on the wall, because we already had people moving from the Bahamas, coming here. We saw the prosperity, the construction industry growing. Not enough people here in the Cayman Islands to do all of the work, so it was obvious. Now, some people may ask, why are we talking about this? Why are we defending it? Well, let's look at the reaction of other countries, other jurisdictions to challenges and threats when it came to their well-being or to their way of life, right? Let's look at between 1968 and 1978 in Europe and in the UK, for instance. I'm reading here from one website, and it says there the key events leading to the hurried introduction of the Commonwealth Immigrants Act 1978 were the independence of first Kenya and later Uganda and Tanzania. And it says there each of these countries at independence had an established minority population of Indian origin, some of whom had been introduced into East Africa by Britain, which, as colonial power, had employed them on construction projects. Many had left India before its independence and before the creation of Pakistan, and their only citizenship was that of the UK and colonies. The potential numbers of those eligible to travel to the UK, and this is after independence, because remember now, in independence in many of these countries, the new rulers, many of whom had been imprisoned. Those proponents of independence for their countries had been imprisoned by the British because of the stance that they took in relation to independence. So when they got into power, one of the first things that they wanted to do was to remove many people who were there in favored positions at the time, to remove them. So it says here that the potential numbers of those eligible to travel to the UK created alarm, and the Commonwealth Immigration Act 1968 was rushed through Parliament. The new act provided that British subjects would be free from immigration control only if they or at least one of their parents or grandparents had been born, adopted, registered, or naturalized in the UK. The issue of a passport by a British High Commissioner thus ceased to be a qualification for entry free of control. For those subject to controls, another voucher system was introduced. This one was based on tight quotas. The 1968 Act directly and deliberately favored white Commonwealth citizens more likely to have British ancestry. Cabinet papers released in 2002 showed that the thrust of the legislation was designed to have this effect. So why are we doing it here? Why did we do it in the Cayman Islands? Why do we have to review our immigration legislation today? Look at why the British did it then. They did it more because of racial reasons, despite the fact that these are people that they had transplanted into those countries when they were the colonial power, but they did it to keep them out of the UK. We're taking a different approach here in the Cayman Islands. We're not trying to keep people out. We do understand that in order for the Cayman Islands to continue to be successful, to progress, that we will need outside help. We would need expatriate help, but it shall and must not be at the expense of Caymanians, and it must not be at the expense of the possibility of us losing our identity, or, as Commissioner Gerard said, do not sell our birthright for a pottage of porridge.
OC, the fact is we need to find some common ground, regardless of our political views or orientation or race or gender and so on, if we're going to figure this all out together. Because just last year, there was a bill, Pathways to Status, that was introduced in Bermuda.
Yes.
Just last year. Mm-hmm. And the Bermudans gave those politicians, quote unquote, hell. About 1,500 of them congregated right outside the LA, and there was no business to be held.
Mm-hmm. And they had to abandon it at the end of the day.
They had to leave. I mean, they weren't joking. They were. This is something that, you see, it wouldn't be so bad. We wouldn't be having this discussion today, I'm convinced, if it was clear that Caymanians had a clear and fair opportunity in their own community to live, to evolve, to grow, and to become successful, and to hold on to their self-esteem. If we were, because, you know, as the quote from Rachel Manley said when she was speaking of her dad, Caymanians don't necessarily want any handout. They just want a fair opportunity to live, breathe like everybody else in their own community. The concern is you have folks that came here, as some of my friends will say, with one shirt on their back. They're now earning 7 figures and they pretend like they don't know who you are. And Caymanians have seen how these folks have evolved, and they're asking themselves, well, how can this person evolve to that level and I can't? When I have the same ability, the same skills and whatever, I see and read the same thing. So it's no surprise that we're now having the level of crime that we're having today, because people will find outside ways of the normal trajectory to go and find employment.
Yeah.
I mean, make a living.
Exactly. Now, Dr. Mark Field, looking at the 1971-72 legislation, the whole issue of permanent residence was almost virtually absent.
There was no
from there. It was basically permanent residence for the rich and the famous, or if you had been registered or naturalized as a British, at that time it was called British Dependent Territory citizen, then you had the right of abode in the Cayman Islands. And I think it was naturalization by discretion as opposed to naturalization by operation of law or by right. It was naturalization by discretion. You had the right to reside permanently in the Cayman Islands. But other than that, this whole concept that we introduced later on, with the after the rollover policy, and we got to key employee, and if you became a key employee, then you had the right to stay on for an additional period of time,
9 years.
and then that would qualify you for applying for permanent residence. What we were doing at that point in time, we were choosing winners and losers, and the only winners at that time were those persons who got beyond the 7 years.
And
but the whole concept of permanent residence
was not in the law.
1971 was never there. Why did we introduce it? Why didn't we?
It was never in the law.
Why didn't we keep it and restrict it to those persons who could live here without having to work and could afford for their upkeep without becoming a charge of the state?
Well, I can't find the article now, but I'll try to find it the next time I come. The whole concept of permanent residence was, and I think that Mr. Vassell Johnson laid that out in the paper that he did, was for people who did not have to find jobs in the Cayman Islands to come here to bring money, to spend money in the supermarkets, to rent cars, to build houses, to hire people. That was the whole concept of permanent residence. It was not permanent residence to live in the Cayman Islands as to become a Caymanian citizen, a Caymanian. The whole concept of permanent residence was for relegated and a class of wealthy people to come to stay in the Caymans who did not need to work. That was the whole concept of permanent residence.
If you have one caller, let's see if we can grab that caller before we go to a commercial break. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. Sorry to keep you waiting.
That's okay. Good morning, Dr. Marfield, Mr. O'Connor.
Morning.
Mr. Teresa, the points you are making are relevant, but some of the problem is our own Caymanian people are that, and that's another discussion. They go into try to uplift the way Caymanian people think. But what I'm calling about, since you talk about permanent residency, and I am very shocked and saw that was 6 people now have appealed to the court because they didn't have the patience to wait till the immigration department pursue their permanent residency, and you go to court and the court don't overrule and give them their right. Now, that kind of person, I would say right off, we don't need that type of person here if that's the way they're going to operate, the court to get their way. Now, based on what, I don't have much knowledge about how the immigration work, but I know they have to process 24,000 work permits and also temporary work permits and also these permanent residence, business license and whatnot. Now, I don't know how many 100 people applying for permanent residency, so it would take time for the board. I don't know anything about it, but I know how board operate and how work is and running companies. It takes time for them to operate. And for them to be impatient and sue and get their way,
I don't think we need that person here, and I'm calling on the government this morning to look at the law how to rectify this, because that kind of person we don't need in our island. They can stoop to that low and then get compensation and all kind of financial benefits from going through the courts. Expenses and all this kind of thing. For it. We don't need that type of person here, and we need to protect our island, because we need to look at the picture and use our mind to look what would happen in 20 and 30 years if the policy continues on here. I've seen what happened in other Eastern Caribbean. I like to read the history and development of our Eastern islands and small islands and what happened up there. We don't want to become like them, gentlemen, ladies. Yeah. We don't want to become like them.
Thank you very much, caller. We were told that the phone bank is all full with callers. So what we're going to do is that when we come back from the commercial break, we're going to suspend, our discussion in terms of the points that we've been raised. Gives us the opportunity to do some more background research and stuff like that for Monday, and then we will hear from all of our listeners what they have to say in that regard.
Before we go right to the break, yes. For the caller, we have something like over 900 applications plus an unknown number of their dependents for processing.
Wow, yeah. Please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We have about 10 minutes left, and we have the phone lines are all overloaded at this point in time, so we're asking callers to be as brief as you possibly can so that we're able to accommodate all of our callers. First caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Morning, Mr. O.C. Good morning, Dr. McPhail, and good morning to Mrs. Pitcairn.
Morning, sir.
Good morning.
Always a pleasure listening to you guys on a Friday morning. Mrs. Pitcairn, welcome back. You were missed. Great story about Russia at the beginning of the show. Just want to jump straight into it. I greatly appreciate the historical context and the research that you guys do. It's the best show on a Friday without a doubt.
And on a Monday and Wednesday also.
I only get a chance to really listen on a Friday, sir.
Okay.
But I believe you. What I was going to ask is, I was wondering if you guys could speak to the irony of some of the issues that you talk about in the 1970s. Dr. Steve takes us back even further than that. And the fact that in 2017, it feels that nothing much has really changed for Caymanian people in the Cayman Islands. You have increased instances whereby discrimination, open prejudice and bigotry against Caymanians at various levels, whether it be going to a restaurant, going to a hotel, seeking employment, seems to be commonplace now, and nobody seems to be officially disturbed by that. Yet we had something called the Caymanian Protection Law. I'm not concerned and I'm not advocating for a blanket nationalistic policy on anything. I'm just saying that if we are now accepting of the fact in 2017 that discrimination against Caymanians is the soup du jour and everybody's comfortable with that, how much progress have we really made? But more importantly, during the campaign cycle, everybody was about talking about the lack of enforcement, the increase in crime, and the discrimination against Caymanians. A month, 8 weeks into their terms, it's still happening, and nobody has anything to say about it. So just interesting to hear your thoughts in comparing history to where we're at today and how much progress has really been made when you consider that now Caymanians have gone off en masse, come back with university degrees, and still can't get interviews, much less jobs. So thank you very much and have a great day, guys.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. As those old people would say, can't hear quay from him now. He can't hear quay.
Can't hear.
Well, what Mr. Moxham just said there ties into something else that another caller off air question asked about racism in the Cayman Islands and if we still have racism in the Cayman Islands. There is a form of institutionalized racism, but it may not be based on the color of the skin anymore, but based on your nationality. We hear comments from people who have been living here, who have acquired Caymanian status, for instance, and said, now that I have Caymanian status, it is more difficult for me to get a job than when I was on a work permit, because now I have Caymanian status. And it's more difficult. So there's this form of institutionalized racism that we have here in the Cayman Islands. Yes.
They're layers. I mean, that's an element as well in that now Caymanians, irrespective of their the melanin in their skin, are put in one basket. But I had a personal experience with a friend of mine who was visiting recently, and we went to a particular restaurant, and I didn't know management in that particular restaurant. And she and I sat down. She's an American, African American, beautiful lady, hugely qualified. And she, we sat in and they ignored us as if we were, no, I'm telling you, as if we were we were invisible. Yeah.
Okay, we have some more callers. Next caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. 2 callers. Good morning, caller.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
Good morning, all 3 of you. I didn't realize. I just say quickly, it is wonderful listening to you all, as all the previous callers say. Extremely knowledgeable and learning about our past history. I was one, and there are many more instances we know of it, even in recent years, like 40, 45 years ago. Terrible incident. But there was, I remember my mother always talking about it, there was a murder of a young girl. It happened about 1920, I would figure. My mother was standing at the Savannah School out there on the road, all of them were, when she said they were bringing this colored lady, deeply colored lady. My mother always said dark skin, that's what she'd say. And she was standing in the back of the car, carrying her in, and she was tied with a rope in her hands or whatever. And she said that a girl had been murdered somewhere on the Iron Shore, would be on the Cliff Rocks and further east from Savannah here, maybe. She didn't remember exactly where it was, but apparently this woman was the nanny for the children. And the man who found her obviously was the white man, And when she was passing, they accused her of the murder, but he had found the child. Her head had been, I think she was not stabbed, I think she was knocked. Anyway, when she kept saying as she passed by, my mother never forgot that. And she was saying, the one that find her killer. The one that find her killer. And my mother never forgot that. She went to prison in Jamaica, the lady, and she passed away there, I think, from pneumonia, from the whole cold concrete cells. And, she was exonerated, it seems, posthumously, of course. But I just wondered if all of you know anything more about that and who it was. It's a shameful disgrace. Just because it was some kind of sexual thing, but that was kind of taboo then. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. That's why I kept saying that. She saw what was interaction between this man. And it could have been his niece or his daughter. I don't know. But I just wondered.
Thank you very much, caller. Dr. Steve McPhail, I'm going to ask you if you know anything about that, but we're going to take the next caller and then we can then address both issues at the same time. Okay. This is going to be our final call for the morning as well. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Wonderful program again to everybody there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't want to call individual names. Just quickly, I don't know how familiar, I'll ask a question. How familiar are you with the 1992 Tourism Development Plan? Steve, Dr. Steve and Mr. Kern?
The 1993?
1992 Tourism Management Plan.
No, I'm not too familiar with that. No.
I get your copy. Mr. Risa?
Not too familiar.
Okay. That plan followed on with the 1979 Laventhal and Howard Tourism Management Plan. The 1992 was done by Coopers and Libran. In that plan, in recognition of the fact that Cayman had rejected, the business community had rejected the 1975 draft development plan, physical development plan, said, and they recognized the problems and the inequities, the way Caymanians were being treated in 92 in the tourism industry. And recognizing that Caymanians had been the foundation of the tourism industry, but it had been taken over by persons who came after it was founded. They went through the history. I don't need to name all the other early hotels and who developed them. And they said that the animosity that had developed between the expatriates and the Caymanians is something that needed attention because they needed to work towards becoming cooperative with one another and depending to work on with one another. But they also saw and recognized that a lot of the animosity was a direct result of too fast and out of control growth. A couple of things that they proposed. One is, number one, a hotel moratorium, which was lifted after certain things took place and certain people were taken care of after the senior ministers had formed a consultancy firm. And then some of the hotels were built on the West Bay Beach. And they said that hotels in the Cayman Islands should be staffed by Caymanians to a minimum of 60%. And if you didn't have the labor force, then you should not develop it because it was going to cause too much of an influx of new people coming in at a very low rate, because the addiction to cheap labor is what has caused a lot of our problems. In the UK, same problem here. This addiction to cheap labor, where people cannot live at a standard of living that is adequate for our type of society. And in that, they said it had to be 60%. I think it was occupancy had to be an average throughout the year of 75%, because if you didn't have proper occupancy, then you couldn't afford to pay the people a wage at which they could live.
Colin, we can't allow you to go into detail into it, but if you give us a quick summary in terms of the point that that you want to make.
You're talking about the Caymanian Protection Law. This saw that what we had in place was not working, was not good, and in effect, I attended a lot of the meetings that they had, and in private talks, but not included, it was open, blatant corruption to the core in the way permits were granted, in the whole way development plans were granted, and that it was going to get worse and worse and worse for the Caymanian people. And they said it must have a Caymanian first policy in tourism.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for that. We're going to try. I'm trying to find out online, but if not, we'd appreciate if you have an electronic copy of it. If you could forward it to us, we would appreciate that. If not, just forward it to For the Record at candw.ky, and I can then share it with my two co-hosts, Mr. Billy. Thank you very much for that. Dr. McField, the previous caller to that, Mr. Hurlston, that story that he related to us, you know anything about that?
No, what was that story about again?
About the death of a child in the sports area. It seemed as if it was a murder, and there was a black woman who was brought into town and tied up with rope, who was being accused of it. Apparently she was convicted, sent to Jamaica. Died of pneumonia over there, possibly. Later on in life was exonerated from that murder.
Don't know about that, but I'll have to research that to find out. But that's something I'd like to know.
Okay. Any final comments, Ms. Teresa? Closing comments?
No, just that one of the previous callers, I like to call him the tax man in a very fond way. But yeah, I mean, if you look at our most recent elections, you will see the kind of minstrels that we developed when people were, propagating disparaging impressions of some of the politicians that ran, and how they were portrayed and lampooned as I said, in very pejorative and disparaging ways. So that thing is right here, front and center. That ugly thing called racism, and And it takes generations to get past that. One of the beautiful things, however, that I certainly notice among my kids and their friends is that at least it seems as though it's taken a different position, in that people talk openly about it, and friendship is not really based on race.
Okay, Dr. McField.
I just want to leave your readers again,
listeners,
with a quote from the Honorable late T.W. Farrington, J.P. from West Bay, when he said, I would like at this time to quote a remark made to me by Commissioner Cardinal of blessed memory on the eve of his departure on promotion to the Falkland Islands. That was in 1937. And this is what Cardinal said, Alan Cardinal said to Willie. He says, Willie, my boy, you have now been put on the map. For God's sake, promise me that you will not allow outsiders to come and take this beautiful island away from you. I would like to leave with that.
And we didn't keep our promise. And as a result of that, now we're trying to restore some of that. And it's going to be a heck of a fight because there are so many people here now with vested interests.
Lots of vested
interests. And when we talk about the vested interests and interest, it's not the interest of Caymanians, but the interest of themselves and what they have invested here in the Cayman Islands. So there's going to be a lot of pushback. Ms. Teresa asked the question off air. Are politicians going to be prepared to do what is right when it comes to the whole issue of permanent residency and Caymanian status? And my response to her was, they had better do it, because if they don't, someone else will do it for them. It may take 4 more years for someone else to emerge to do it for them, but that will happen. But I believe and I have confidence that the number of legislators who talked about the necessary changes, the changes that are necessary in relation to our immigration legislation and our approach to treating Caymanians, doing right for Caymanians, that even those who are now part of the unity government, government of national unity, will push for those changes to take place. And if those changes do not take place, then they have an option: walk over to the other side. Because you made promises, and these days people remember it. They remember it even more, and they will be able to put it out there on social media, or so some of you may call it anti-social media. They will put it out there and remind you of what you said and what you promised. So you need to do that. What we promise here is that on Monday, we will come back with this discussion. What we want to do, though, because we continue to hear people say, everyone talks about the problem, but nobody has any solutions. We want you. We're going to present some viable solutions to you in terms of the approach to be taken as far as the granting the acquisition of Caymanian status, and whether or not we need to take the whole concept of permanent residence and ensuring that there is security of tenure for all and sundry who come here on a work permit, to show you that we need to take that and throw that out of the door, and we won't be throwing away the baby with the bathwater either.
We're going to find common ground.
Yes. So, folks, I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. There was always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want. I say to you, have a great day, have a great weekend. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Mr. Gilbert McLean if he's on today, or whomever is covering for Sterling Dwayne Ebanks on Talk today. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these 3 wonderful, beautiful Cayman Islands that we love and we adore, and that we want to remain under our Caymanian control.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.